Hey friends, welcome to the Sabrina Scott podcast. I know it's been a minute, sorry guys. Life is lifing, and I'm trying to make episodes when I'm inspired rather than feeling like obligated. So, hooray for that, I guess. Anyway, okay, let's get down to business. Welcome to the Sabrina Scott podcast, where I talk all about how to claim your magic and change your life. We talk about life, love, healing, spirituality, witchcraft, magic, mediumship, feminine energy, and sometimes media and pop culture. And in today's episode, I am fresh off of watching a CBC gem documentary, quote-unquote documentary, called Coven, which came out a few weeks ago. And I was approached by a journalist to do an interview about witchcraft. And the full interview that I did, most of which was not featured, is actually on my Substack in the paid section. My Substack is sabrina.substack.com. Anyway, they quoted like one sentence of me, and it was the most bitchy sentence, of course, as journalists tend to do. No shade, I get it. You need the clicks, you need the drama. I get it. I'll happily oblige and be dramatic, even though literally I was just being myself, being honest with what I said. But anyway, there was a feature on witchcraft in order to promote this documentary. And so I was interviewed. Anyway, that's not the important part. So I decided to actually sit down with one of my witchy friends and actually watch this documentary from end to end. And we put it on Zoom. We paused it to comment on it, and it was actually so much fun. But so I want to comment on my opinion of this documentary called Coven, and you can watch it for free on CBC Gem. You just have to make a free account, and you can watch it pretty much instantly online. So the TLDR, I did not like this documentary. Probably that comes as absolutely no surprise. No shade necessarily, like whatever. It's hard to make a film. I totally get that. But I did want to just talk about it. So I think it is important as a practicing witch, someone who's been doing this shit for a really long time, to just talk about and critique the ways that we do tend to be represented in the media. And documentary is something that claims to be truthful, right? It claims to be an accurate representation of what something is. And so I do think it is really crucial for witchy folks who have been in witchy land for a long time to at least comment on this stuff, right? Like I feel free, please watch the documentary. Let me know what you think. Maybe you disagree with me. And if you do, that's okay. There's enough space in this world for everyone of all of our different wonderful fun opinions. So there will be some spoilers obviously in this episode as I break down what I saw in this documentary. And yeah, so feel free to go watch it. It's all good. So the documentary follows three, as it says, millennial women on their journey to kind of connect with quote unquote witchcraft. And for me, it was a very kind of convoluted, there was no real through line. It was a bit disjointed, which didn't really make sense. Like, there was no overarching narrative of what is going on with these three women that we see featured. One of the things that really irked me about this film as well was never once was witchcraft and magic defined. The differences between Wicca and witchcraft were not in any way defined or explored or explained or anything like that, which I think is really unfortunate, because throughout this whole film, which in my opinion actually is not really about witchcraft at all, which sounds a bit odd. It was a bit of a strange takeaway for me to watch this whole thing. And my friend agreed too. Like, this was really not a film about witchcraft whatsoever. We don't see anyone's altar. No one's really talking about what they're doing in their magical practice. It's not spoken of. No one really addresses it. None of the three people that we see followed. What is talked about is, to some extent, distant heritage. That was a big focus, actually. Past life regression. And interestingly, in my experience, past life regression is something that most witches I've met don't really give a shit about, and is not a big part of people's practice in general. Is it a practice that some people do? Totally. But most witches, like, from past lives is a separate issue from witchcraft. You can believe in past lives and be a witch. You cannot believe in past lives and be a witch. It really has nothing whatsoever to do with witchcraft as a whole. It's a separate belief system. And one of the women in the documentary was able to trace her heritage to some women who were killed in the witch trials in Salem, or I think one in Salem and one in Scotland, if I'm remembering right. I can't quite exactly remember the specifics on that. But regardless, one of the things that my friend and I were critiquing about this was it's very interesting, the ancestors that people tend to focus on, you know, and these ancestors were like 300, 400 years ago. And it made me wonder, like, why are we focusing on, first of all, such ancient ancestors in faraway places? And what about connecting with more recent ancestors, like picking and choosing the ancestors that we are engaging with and choosing the ones that are the most oppressed in order to align with witchcraft? I think it's an interesting choice. Like, on one hand, I totally get, again, I would probably also like do some of that work. Like, if I found out that my ancestors were killed in any kind of witch trial or anything, like, yeah, I would totally want to acknowledge that as a part of my heritage. But I think it's also important for anyone who does have that lineage to acknowledge that that is not your whole be all and end all of your lineage. And it struck me a little bit as this kind of oppression Olympics of the ancestors. And I'm sure that's not how the lady in the documentary related to that practice, and that's cool. I don't want to speak for her. Like, you can watch the documentary and see for yourself your thoughts on all of that. But it made me feel a little bit sad for any of her more recent ancestors who maybe are just forgotten about or not acknowledged because they're not immediately tied to witchcraft or oppressed or tied to this kind of victim narrative that we do see in a lot of people who are merging the concept of witchcraft with the concept of victimhood. There was someone in the documentary that was talking about, if you are part of an oppressed people, then this practice is for you. And like, it's a very bizarre take, and it is unfortunately a really common take in witchy land of various stripes, where witchcraft is a tool of the oppressed. And I'm sure that's an argument I made when I was like 20. Totally fair thing to think. But the truth is that witchcraft and magic has historically been used by people of various social statures and people of various backgrounds. Oppressed, oppressor, whatever. I find those categories also just very boring. And if you go far back enough in history, they break down. I think everyone has occupied both of those categories at some point in history. And so I do find those categories pretty useless. I'll just say that. And I also don't find that making an allegiance between the self and victimhood, whether that's through having ancestors that are persecuted as witches or something else, some other kind of victimhood, historical, whether that's real or imagined or whatever, I don't always find that that's the healthiest place to be rooting our identities. Like, I think there is something to be said for acknowledging the ways that either we as individuals or our families or our ancestors have been hurt, and rather than over-identifying with that victimhood, what I always tend to suggest people do is to find ways to heal that ancestral lineage. And here we've got one of my cats sneezing. I don't know if you guys can hear that. But there is nothing really all that empowering, I don't think, about over-identifying with victimhood and over-identifying with marginalization. And one of the things I actually, in contrast, really love about witchcraft as a practice is it does help us reclaim our agency and heal those lineages of pain, whatever that happens to be. And I don't know, I hate the whole, like, we are the granddaughters of the witches that you didn't burn or whatever, which is a very common narrative. And I do see it in some ways as this kind of appropriation of trauma that some people are doing. And again, this is no shade on anyone on the documentary. It's a widespread and common thing in witchy spaces, has been for years. And I don't find it the most helpful and positive way to relate to witchcraft. Obviously, everyone can do whatever the fuck they want. It's a free country. Do your thing. But for me, like, I would never be teaching people that witchcraft is about leaning into the ways that you've been oppressed and vibing on that. Like, I think we can all relate to our histories in so many different ways. And I think, yeah, that does mean acknowledging past pains, recent and historical. And I think there's also something that needs to be done with magic and witchcraft and spirituality and all of this, and addressing our ancestry. I think we also need to, in order to have that full picture, to acknowledge the positives, to acknowledge the wins, to acknowledge the ways that our ancestors have been successful, victorious, privileged. If any of us are still alive today, then some of our ancestors won. And I think that is not given enough weight in discussions of diving into our heritage and all of this within the context of reclamation, specifically when it involves witchiness. Yeah, I don't know. I feel like the oppression Olympics of the ancestors makes me a little bit uncomfortable. And I do think, yeah, there's some healing work to be done there for folks. Totally get that. But I think it can also be a way of avoiding the more recent ancestral practice that often should happen if people feel called to. I would never tell people, you should do this, you should do that, whatever. We all are free to make our own choices. At the same time, I know that for me in my practice, working with the ancestors, making the healing effort, building relationships with the more recently passed ancestors has been a crucial element of my practice. And I think when we heal, we being the most recently alive, if we are going to delve into ancestry, I do think it is part of our responsibility to also attend to the more recently passed, to attend to probably the ancestors that a lot of people would say the boring ancestors, the just random ass suburban ancestor who lived on a farm and whatever. Yeah, that's going to be a little bit boring, not too much to talk about in a documentary or whatever, but we all have those boring ancestors. Not everyone's ancestor was a queen or a king or fancy or oppressed in some famous way. We all also have the boring ancestors, and I think those boring ancestors deserve as much attention and thought and feeling and ritual as the, like, quote unquote, whatever ancestors who are going to fall into different famous categories, fancy categories, oppressed categories, etc. And so that was a bit irksome for me, I will say. There's a lot of other comments I want to make about some of the practices that I witnessed that I just have critiques, I guess, as someone who has been in witchy land for a very long time, who's practiced with a lot of different types of groups, and so I feel like I can speak to the legitimacy of certain things. I don't want to put anyone on blast, not really what I'm here to do, but I really wish that some more expertise and some more vetting went into who gets counted as an expert in some documentaries. And I think that's the problem with all documentaries, really. Having a panel of experts to help you really discern who are the right people to talk to. I think that's going to be a really important thing for any documentary about any topic. And unfortunately, it's really common, I've seen with a lot of witchy documentaries, they just kind of seem to be interviewing whoever who might not be, let's say, the most authoritative or knowledgeable or fill in the blank person in that community or in that larger sphere of people, let's say in this case, who are witchy. So that was a little bit unfortunate, but also pretty expected. That's been par for the course with most witchcraft documentaries I've seen, which is, again, just kind of too bad. What else do I want to say about this? I do feel that whoever watches this documentary and knows nothing about witchcraft is going to be even more confused by the time they're done watching the documentary. I feel like they're going to have even less idea what witchcraft is actually about. And I feel like that's really unfortunate. It was very much about the journey of these three different individuals, and the journey was mostly pretty vague and was mostly about personal identity more than it was about witchcraft. And that's valid. That's a thing. Absolutely. Identity is an interesting thing that a lot of people are talking about right now. It seems to be the forefront of a lot of people's minds right now. Absolutely. And I think it's possible to incorporate our identities into witchcraft. Actually, that is what a lot of my work involves. If anyone's been in my space for a long time, you'll know that actually these three folks in the documentary is in many ways a perfect client, a perfect student for my type of work. Like, I love guiding people through thinking about their identity, thinking about their heritage. And what's different from what I do than what I saw in the documentary is I love working with people to help them figure out what the fuck their own unique practice should look like based on their unique position, their heritage, their interests, their identity, the parts of them that they really want to highlight. Everyone's witchcraft practice is going to be super different, can be super different, and I love that. One of my favorite things about the work that I do is guiding people to get in touch with their unique magical power, their unique vision, their unique authenticity, the unique things that they have to bring into this world as a witch coming from their specific place. Fucking love that. Like, I love working with people on their journey towards that. Unfortunately, that's not really what I saw in this documentary. I didn't really see any merging of witchcraft with identity and history and heritage. We didn't really see any of these 3 women that were followed practice any witchcraft. We didn't see their altars. We didn't see what spirits they work with. We didn't really get to hear at all about what do they believe, what does spirituality mean to them. Like, there was maybe a vague sentence or two at the beginning about connecting with yourself and connecting with the earth, but that doesn't really, like, what does that really mean? Like, it wasn't really explored at all. And so there was really no focus on what do I believe. So the belief aspect, and then there was also no focus on what do I do? What does doing magic actually mean to me? There was none of that. And obviously, any piece of media, any documentary, nothing, like, any piece of media can't be the be all end all. It can't do everything. It can't be about everything. I totally get that. So every piece of media is limited to be just what it is, and that's cool. And so maybe it's just that this was misnamed, misrepresented, missold for what it is. It's really was a documentary that was so much more about individual heritage for these 3 individuals rather than witchcraft at large. And magic was talked about in a very general way. Like, they didn't distinguish between, like, one of the things that really bothered me is there was no distinction between, like, Santeria or voodoo or witchcraft in general versus Wicca versus the different types of Western magic versus the different types of magic that come out of African diasporic traditions. Like, there was really no, and then I guess Romania would be the other example. Like, there was really no distinction between the different types of magic in different places, either historically or in the contemporary sense. And so if I was a total newbie watching this documentary being intrigued about witchcraft, I definitely would be under the incorrect idea that all of these types of magic is the same or they're related in some way. And it's in some ways they might be in terms of technique, working with energy to get shit done. Totally. Collaborating with the vibes, collaborating with the spirits, collaborating with the earth. Totally cool. Sure. But there was really, and I guess that's not what the documentary was really about, but I think it would have been really simple just to have 2 seconds of explaining the differences between these things, just so that the viewer and also the people featured are not confused about what is going on. And of course, like any media, there's a chance that was filmed and then just didn't make it into the final cut. Since I've been in multiple documentaries, believe me, I know there's a documentary about me that is just 5 minutes of my dick jokes because we're at the candle store and there's candles of genitals, and all of the 10 hours of me talking about philosophy was cut out of the documentary. So trust me, I totally get it that what we see in the documentary might not be actually the entirety of what was filmed. Obviously it isn't. And so I'm really curious what narratives were left on the editing room floor. Really curious if anything more deep was talked about or witchcraft was talked about in any more depth. That would have been really cool to see. It would have been really nice to have some real representation of what the fuck is witchcraft actually. But unfortunately, the way that witchcraft was presented, at least in my opinion, it makes us look kind of delusional and crazy. And that's a little bit unfortunate, I think. This emphasis on past lives, emphasis on I am definitely the reincarnation of that famous occultist. Like, I can't really condone that. Obviously, believe whatever the fuck you want. If you think you're the reincarnation of a famous occultist, that's cool. Do your thing. Like, whatever. It's not affecting my life. At the same time, like, when that's presented in a documentary as, like, a mainstream belief that multiple people kind of have, then that does paint this view of witches that I really don't think is accurate. You know, one of the women in the film also seemed to be at least playing with the idea that she was a reincarnation of the woman who is in her ancestry who was a witch who was killed or was accused of being a witch, right? That's the other interesting thing about this type of history is like, was that person a witch? Were they not a witch? The history of the witch trials, it's difficult to say. Like, some women were just killed for being a bit quirky or weird or unpopular or pissing someone off. And so to really say that this person, because they were killed for witchcraft, means that they were actually a witch, I don't think that's actually historically accurate. I don't think we can make that leap and know that we are correct. Is it a possibility? Absolutely. Is it 100% certain? No. And so, you know, this person in the doc was like, yeah, like maybe I'm the reincarnation of this person who was executed. And it's like, that is not a mainstream belief within witchcraft. And you actually don't need to be a reincarnation of fucking any magic practitioner ever in order to be valid in your witchcraft practice. You know, I tell people this all the time as my students, you know, you don't have to appeal to heritage. You don't have to appeal to reincarnation. You don't have to have any family member who believed in witchcraft, practiced magic, did mediumship, anything like that. Do I have, you know, some of that in my background? Yes, I do. But I always remind people, like, you don't fucking need that. That does not make me more valid than anyone else. That does not make my practice more valid than anyone else. Does it mean that I'm better at, you know, noticing when someone's practice is full of shit? Yeah, because I've been around magic and energy work and mediumship for so long that my bullshit meter around spirituality is just very, very sensitive and very, very accurate, I would say. That's my advantage. But anyone can access magic. Anyone can be a witch. Like, you don't need to go back into history and be like, oh, I'm the reincarnation of this person, or hey, I'm the reincarnation of someone who was burned at the trials. Like, you don't need that. And since so many people in this documentary, and I think the other person was kind of alluding to maybe one of her relatives was doing some kind of earth-based prayer stuff, and while that might be valid, while that might be true for her, like, that's totally cool. Unfortunately, if someone was totally clueless and was watching this documentary and we have these people claiming reincarnation, we have this other person being like, oh yeah, my ancestors did some stuff, maybe, that is going to give the incorrect idea that, okay, if I'm going to be a witch, I also need to find some kind of link in terms of reincarnation, or I need to find some kind of link in terms of heritage, and you just don't need that. And I just want to make that really clear to anyone who's interested in witchcraft, and maybe you watch the documentary and maybe you're like, oh fuck, like, all my ancestors are Christian and they don't give a fuck about witchcraft and whatever, you know. And it just, it's tough, because, like, on one hand, I'm like, yeah, do your thing, it's all good. On the other hand, it's like, no, this is giving everyone the wrong idea. And I think that can be, like, a problem or a risk or just something to consider when we're thinking about documentary that's about a whole belief system or a whole series of belief systems or a whole series of communities, because witchcraft and magic is very, very diverse. And yeah, there's some similarities about what do we believe, but it's also very diverse. And so whenever you're doing a documentary about anything where you've got a very diverse community, like, it's this tough thing, right? This balance between the specific and the universal. And unfortunately, I don't really think that this documentary presented that, since there was no external narrator giving us feedback or giving us some kind of steering of, okay, I'm a documentary filmmaker, I'm interviewing these 3 people, here's how I met them, here's why I'm interviewing them. All of that is gone. And so we just see these 3 people. We have no idea how they were recruited for the project. We have no idea why the project is being made. We have no idea why why the filmmaker decided to do this project. We have no idea who's funding this. Like, all of these things are absent. And so personally, I tend to really love documentaries where all of that shit is made explicit, so we know, oh, I found these people off Craigslist, or like, I posted an ad, or hey, these people were my friends, or hey, I knew these people through community and I got curious. And to have that connection of, like, why are we here is something I do tend to appreciate in documentary filmmaking, because it makes the whole process more transparent. And I really do believe that we can really only assess documentary when we know everything that happens outside of it, when we know the full context, the process, all of that, because the documentary is really just only a small part of that entire story. And so I guess the TLDR, I was entertained, I was disappointed, I laughed, I paused to rant many, many, many times. And I think what made me sad at the end of it is all these three people seem like not really growing in their witchcraft throughout the course of the documentary. You know, they might have a little bit more connection to their heritage or aspects of their identity. That's okay. But do we see their magic develop? Do we hear anything about how their relationship to witchcraft and magic has evolved? Not a single thing. Not a single thing. And so it really seemed like the whole project was really about identity and not about witchcraft, because we don't see their magic progress. We don't see them doing magic at all. We don't have any idea what magic even means to these people. We don't see any relationship to ritual. We don't see anyone doing ritual. You know, there's some instances where some practitioners are doing ritual to them, but there's nothing, I don't really find that empowering. You know, like, where are we seeing these newbies or these people who are growing in their practice? When there's my cat sneezing again, sorry guys. Like, we're not seeing these people grow in their witchcraft. We're not seeing them as like fumbling newbie witches, and then by the end of the documentary, maybe they learn some new witchcraft skills. We get to see them practice that, and we get to hear about, you know, what their witchcraft means and how they do it and whatever. We don't hear that. That's not in the documentary. And so, again, we don't know if that was filmed and then it was cut. Who knows? It's possible. But I think I was disappointed. Is it the worst witchcraft documentary I've ever seen? Like, not necessarily. Will it mislead a lot of people? I think, yes, it will. Does it accurately represent witchcraft? In my opinion, no. Does it represent the experience of these three unique individuals? Like, yes. And I think that's maybe a better understanding of what this was. And the other thing, too, is, like, these three people, are they representative of who I've experienced in witchy land? Like, not necessarily. Are they people I would welcome into my space as students? Like, potentially, you know. And again, this is not me trying to like recruit people or whatever. Like, you know, if anyone is in the documentary who's listening to this, like, this is not me trying to recruit you. I'm not trying to, you know, throw shade or anything like that. But my point here is, it's disappointing to me that after they're interfacing with all these experts, that they don't really seem like they have gained any magical skills or any new relationship to what magic is. And that for me is really disappointing. And as a witchcraft teacher too, because I'm like, oh no, like, this is just not how I would have gone about it. And that's not to say that the way that I do things is the only way we can go about things. Like, obviously there's so many different ways to do that. But what I'm also witnessing is the lack of empowerment, right? Again, they're having these experts kind of do ritual for them. And whenever, let's say one of my students has come to me for consult, I'm like, you know, I could do it for you, but how about I teach you how to do it for yourself? How about I guide you through it? How about I ask you some questions and we come up with the ritual together, but you take the lead on what it is that we're doing, you know? Because I do think it really is about throwing back that, you know, the beach ball of personal agency back to the practitioner, even if they're new. The only way... Oh my god, my cat is like knocking things over because I'm ignoring her. Choya, can you please stop being insane? Oh wow, she just almost knocked over my computer. Great job. But I think what's disappointing to me more than anything is just that there's no personal... like, we don't see the personal agency in the documentary, and perhaps it arrived, perhaps it has been activated, and we just don't see it, or it wasn't filmed, or it happened after the documentary was filmed, and that's totally cool. But it really just left me unsatisfied, because I didn't really see any spiritual or magical growth in the people that were featured in the way the documentary was cut. And so for me as a witch, that's disappointing, because, you know, at the end of the day, witchcraft identity is a part of it for sure, but at the end of the day, identity is identity, witchcraft is witchcraft. Do they interweave together? Yes. And can developing your connection to your heritage and your identity give you more to draw from when you're thinking about how to structure your witchcraft practice? Yes, absolutely. But we didn't see those connections made in this documentary, and for me that was disappointing, because it was just a missed opportunity all around. Okay, that's my rant. I've been ranting for half an hour. The end. You can watch it on, again, CBC Gem. Again, I'm not a fan. I don't think it is a great documentary. But, I just want to high five someone for finishing a feature-length film. I'm sure that's not easy to do. And I know documentaries, as a person who has been in many of them, I do know that oftentimes what you see in the documentary is not necessarily the same as what's happening in real life. So I just also want to throw that out there, as I do know sometimes things can be cut and edited in ways to tell certain stories that are not the entire story, right? It's a particular story that the filmmaker wants to tell for whatever reason, funding, personal agenda, whatever. Sometimes that's the case, sometimes it's not. And so I think we do have to keep that in mind when reviewing any type of media, especially documentary media. Anyway, okay, that's it for now. I'm done talking. Thank you so much for listening to the podcast. If you can give me a review, maybe share with a friend, let me know what you think. And there is a link to all my links in the description of this episode, where you can grab any of my freebies, my top 13 witchy books, my 4 easy tarot spreads, maybe even learn more about my Claim Your Magic community. And yeah, check it the fuck out, my friends. Please give it a look. Maybe you'll be able to meet some new witchy people of your own. And the community has been really fun. We just did the spring equinox class yesterday as I'm recording this. I don't know when I'm going to post this live. We did that class on the 16th, Saturday, March. I'm saying that backwards, but whatever. It was super, super fun. Our group coaching for the VIP members is, I think, next week sometime or the week after. And the first live class was on deities. That was in February, and whenever you join, you'll be able to see everything. The class for April is going to be on authenticity and living an authentic life, and I'm really excited for it. So that's it from me for now. Much love, my friends. Talk to you guys soon. Bye.